Up to now, I've made quite a lot of reference to hazard reviews, and especially in context to being a first level or entry method for hazard identification. I want to provide you with an introduction to the hazard review technique. Now, this section might get heavy. However, I must emphasize that it's only a basic overview, as I want to keep it as light as possible. There are plenty of sources on the internet detailing the mechanics of hazards and other HIRA methods. But as with every HIRA method, it's advisable that the organization, your organization, has the people with the necessary skill set and experience in the application of those methods. So before embarking on your hazard review, it's important to make sure that you have the necessary tools, some essentials. Hazard reviews involve brainstorming, and it'd be a terrible waste of resources if you overlook planning and preparation, especially your organization's resources. So let's look at some essentials. Of course, the most important thing is information sources for providing input data. We've already discussed the two primary sources of information for a hazard review, which are historical records on incidents, accidents, and design or engineering documents. Now, skip back to the section titled Information Sources for HIRA Reviews for more details if you want a refresher. Now, hazard review, we've also said, needs enabling documents, and we've already talked about the HIRA procedure. The items highlighted in green, which are risk criteria and risk assessment criteria, we'll discuss in the next section, step 2, which is all about risk assessments. Some items are highlighted in yellow here, which are the terms of reference, the TOR, the hazard procedure, the checklist, and recording sheets. So we're going to cover this in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. In our hazard review enabling documents, we mentioned that TORs, which is the terms of reference, plays a pivotal role. A typical TOR will include objectives, scope, methodology, supporting documents, and reference documents. Please refer to your course material if you want to get the full breakdown of the list. The hazard procedure itself, in addition to the standard aspects within the procedure, definitions, abbreviations, and so on, the typical aspects would include purpose, scope, and intent, and the requirements for the hazard TOR, which we discussed previously. Also, detailed team composition, requirements, roles and responsibilities, methodology, and any follow-up aspects. Checklists play a huge role in a hazard review process, and not all the items on the checklist will be applicable. However, the process is systematic in approach to avoid oversight. A hazard checklist typically includes details on the hazard type, a guide word to focus attention on, and expanders to facilitate team discussions and brainstorming. Recording sheets are, of course, where you capture all the thoughts that the team discusses, specifically based upon the hazard guide words presented in the checklist. The details are recorded in a standard format record sheet. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the hazard method? Some of the advantages are that it's a great first level or early tool for identification and assessment of the hazards. It provides essential input to project development decisions and is highly valuable as a cross-check review tool, allowing guidance on the use of other HIRA techniques. Remember the peeling away the layers? The disadvantages are that it tends to limit creative thinking. However, the hazard leader can influence that to a certain extent. Used alone, it introduces the potential of limiting to already known hazards, and no new hazard types become identified. On their own, they can limit the ability to satisfy regulatory requirements. However, this can be addressed with the inclusion in the checklist if there are any specific regulatory requirements. The organization might decide to have it facilitated by an external party or a consultant. However, this can be costly, and it will prohibit smaller organizations due to a lack of financial or other resources. So some tips. In the first attempt, the team may not have extensive experience in the hazard process, but any hazard review is a step improvement. In other words, people met, they did a brainstorming exercise, and identified potential hazards and risks. A typical example of what happens in a hazard review is that for each hazard identified, the team reviews a consequence category and determines a product of consequence and likelihood. So they'll probably make use of the risk assessment matrix that they've developed. If the risk is unacceptable, the team will then focus on selecting additional control measures. The team then reassesses the change in the risk level as a result of any mitigation, in other words, the additional control measures that have been put on. The intention is to reduce the risk level to meet the organization's risk criteria requirements for acceptability. And actions are recorded and assigned using the SMART principle, in other words, they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Some cautionary notes. During the hazard brainstorming session, the team might identify a totally different, but more significant consequence. In other words, it might be more to do with environmental or financial. This will then become the motivating factor for the risk assessment. It's likely that there will be an equivalent table, like the people consequence one, but using the factors for consequences in that particular higher risk category, be it environmental or financial. And many organizations combine all the consequence categories and have one table that they use in the hazard process. This allows a team to have a greater range of creative thinking about the various consequences. A lot there, but here's a summary about the hazard method. So its applicability is in workplaces, processes, and application has widened in recent years, including usage in software applications, medical devices, and administrative procedures. The purpose is to identify potential workplace and process hazards and any associated consequences. Its purpose is also to support in the evaluation of risk based upon existing control measures, unmitigated, and then to identify and apply additional control measures if necessary, and then determine the risk reduction impact, which is of course the mitigated. Its purpose is also to provide support to the organization and management in its efforts to manage the risks. Who does them? Typically experienced multidisciplinary team led, or should I say chaired, by an experienced hazard practitioner. What's involved is a creative, structured and systematic approach that is focused and methodical. It's done using a checklist of potential workplace and process hazards to facilitate discussions. And it can be done at various life cycle stages of a process or project, including conceptual, development, realization, operation, improvement and commissioning. But what should you expect from your hazard identification review?